Welcome everybody. This is I want to say last session, or it's not the last session, but it is the last session dealing with the topic of the 10 virtues. So we're going to do a summary. We're going to go over each of some of the key points. We, of course, will be able to follow, but get into all the key points. Hopefully get some feedback from you. And then this will wrap it up until probably 7-8 weeks. You know, what I'm going to do is start up the second series coming from Stolen Legacy. We went into 10 virtues, and now we're going to go into the 7 of arts and sciences. And we'll go systematically take, again, an introductory review of some of the basic ideas of astronomy, geometry, sacred geometry, number, music, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And we're going to focus on one per month. Get into that, and then we also may see where things lead us, because you know it's so much in each one of those. That's like a whole department, you know, within the school. So that's where we're going. So I'm going to do a class in LA, and then I'll duplicate the class in Long Beach and go back and forth. All right. So 10 virtues. I'll start off reading the first handout on the 10 virtues. It says, virtue is the order or discipline of the soul. Each commandment or discipline represented a principle of virtue, and the function of each virtue was to remove a fetter. Hence, a life of virtue was antecedent and preparatory to those further experiences, i.e. the initiations which led to gradual perfection and the divinity of the neophyte. This is from Stolen Legacy, page 104 to 105. It says, to be recognized as a candidate for initiation in the mysteries of antiquity, one must be pure and holy and possess a well-developed and well-trained mind. Having attained the exoteric good life, they would enter on the preparation for initiation. Certain conditions have now to be fulfilled and certain attributes acquired. The aspirant for initiation must be worthy and well qualified, duly and truly prepared. Of course, I have that underlined because that is a major theme within the Masonic order of being worthy and well qualified, duly and truly prepared. Again, tying in how the various initiatory processes again come out of Africa. During this period, the candidate is said to be treading the probationary path, the path which leads up the straight gate, beyond which is the narrow way, or the path of holiness, the way of the cross, which leadeth unto life. This comes out of Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry by C.H. Vail, which is one of the key texts also referred to by George G. James in Stolen Legacy. Key critical book. So in review, we came out of Stolen Legacy. Now the Stolen Legacy, for review, the major point that we were trying to focus on was relative to the question that was raised. What was the question that was raised? The key question that prompted this series. I've spoken about this many times. The key question. What was the key question that was raised in Stolen Legacy? Again, the key word is key question in Stolen Legacy. Nothing comes to mind. It doesn't trigger any kind of ideas. Key question in Stolen Legacy. In Stolen Legacy, there's only one key that is stated. If I say key in Stolen Legacy,
Ball.
No. In Stolen Legacy, he mentions a key.
understanding of.
Wasn't that the question we first started with?
That's right. That's what I
That was
asked.
the first question you asked when we start the book.
That's right. That was the first. That is
The
the.
answer is magic.
Their answer is magic. Right. The question that I asked was, what was the key idea that triggered this series? And so in Legacy, he mentions the key. And again, it was the key to what? I've said this probably, I don't know, 7, 8, 9
The
times.
key to something religion.
Again, this is critical. This is the most critical point of the book. And we spent 10, 12 weeks going through Stolen Legacy. Now we spent 12 weeks going through the 10 virtues.
Come on now, don't stop.
The key, he stated what the key was.
He said something about magic earlier.
Right.
I got
Now magic is the key to what in Stolen Legacy?
the ball for you.
A what? I just couldn't hear you.
That's the laws of the universe.
Yeah, but that's not the definition that's given. In the book, he gives the definition.
What is the key to interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy?
Right. The key to the interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy. The key to the interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy is magic. That's the key. So without the key, you can't interpret correctly ancient religion and philosophy. So I mean, that's the key. And so what's the definition for the key?
The ancient religion and philosophy.
The key to ancient religion and philosophy. You
Magic.
guys forgot? Some of you could recite it before, now you forgot. Magic is the word, what's the definition?
Quality of entity, both human and divine, are distributed throughout its parts. From that contact with the parts produces its energy or qualities. Almost.
Right.
Almost.
It says qualities of entities, human and divine, are distributed throughout the parts, and contact with such entities releases those qualities. So then this definition is the key to interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy. So now the question is, what does that mean? Again, we're doing a review, and so now hopefully these are some of the key points we need to understand. So if we don't understand these points, then we really are still exoteric. You know, you've got literal information, but you haven't really gained knowledge and wisdom and understanding. So then what's the significance of that definition? We've talked about that. Because we talked about that definition, and that definition is given in the context of something. What is the context that is given in? In terms of it's given in relationship to something. What is it given in relationship to? Yes, I mean, throw some things out. You may be right. Energy.
Tapping into your higher self.
Tapping into our higher self, but it's simpler. Relative to Stolen Legacy, he mentions magic. What prompts him to mention magic? Why does he mention magic as the key to interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy in Stolen Legacy? It's related to something. It's in the context of something. He's discussing something that prompts him to give this definition. No. That is the core out of which we've discussed all these different virtues and all these different principles. You gotta remember. Why did he talk about magic? What was the significance of him talking about magic? Why did he bring it up? What point was he trying to show? In Stolen Legacy, he talks about magic relative to something he's talking about. He's trying to show you why an occurrence was possible. The unseen?
Memphite theology.
Right.
What?
Memphite theology. In the context of Memphite theology, why did he bring up the principle of magic?
Magic was a manner of teaching, the way to teach.
No. Relative to Memphite theology, why did he bring up the principle of entities, human and divine, the qualities of entities, human and divine distributed throughout their parts? And contact with such entities releases those qualities. So within that definition, and relative to Memphite theology, why did he bring that out? What point was he illustrating?
He was talking about everything coming out of the moon.
Yeah, but what? How? What was he? Because he was talking about a specific occurrence in Memphite theology. This is the essential point. What is the Memphite theology talking about?
A tongue set up on the top.
Right? And what happened? So it starts off with what? What is the first phase of the Memphite theology? What is it talking about?
Noon.
The noon. And what was the basic characteristic of phase one?
So-called chaos.
So-called chaos. What else? Relative to chaos, what was
No order. No order.
there was no order. And because we talked about this, because there was a key point that we brought out talking about that point. Relative to your personal life, relative to the time we exist in now. We tried to show both how it operates cosmically, but how also it operates individually. This is a summary, review, so we try to go back and review so you can remember some of these things, tie us all together. So within Memphite, so within the noon, the so-called chaos. I said so-called chaos, or pre-order, or pre-creation. And then what happened? This is a very simple story.
It's conceived. God is conceived.
Just what happened in the story? Just think about the story. See, that's the key. That's what it gave stories. If you just remember the basic story, then you can go back and break down the symbolism of the story. But first, just remember the basic story. So what was the basic story? It was in 3 phases. Phase 1 was the noon. Phase 2, phase 3. What were the phases?
Some with the spoken word. Or
Some with the spoken word.
Or some with the ties, time or something like that.
Some with Batab. Help him out. Come on. So you get these little keys, start filling it in. Remember, the importance is what is held in memory. So the 3 phases of the story is phase 1 is the noon. Right? And within the noon existed something. What existed within the noon? What? Speak up so we can hear you. That's okay. That's all right. I said this is a laboratory. They say out of every success, there's probably 99 failures. That means if we're afraid to fail, then we're afraid to succeed. You cannot succeed without failure. You didn't walk, just stand up and walk without falling. So I'm saying this is a laboratory, so feel free to say whatever comes to your mind. It's okay. That's why we're here. We're practicing freedom. This is, it's an experiment. So if we can practice and be free here, then we can move on and be free someplace else. If we can't be free here, how are we going to be free somewhere else? So a part of it is not just studying the information, it's also exercise in the laboratory and expressing and letting your intuitive mind express itself. So the things are coming to your mind, is coming to your mind for a purpose. What usually happens is we then censor what's coming because it may seem to be wrong, or it may be unpleasant, or it may not be appropriate by external, exoteric perspective. And so then you get trapped. And then you carry that through every day. You're going somewhere and your one mind tells you to do this, but then you talk yourself out of it. And then you wonder why you ended up where you ended up at. You know.
The black seed vision of the inner self.
You say what now?
Black seed vision of the inner self.
The black seed
Vision of the inner self.
vision of the inner self. Now you saying that relative to the Memphite theology?
Yes.
Related to what?
The new.
Okay.
She
Yeah.
said that, but she said it so lowly, you didn't hear it.
Is that what she said?
She said darkness.
She said that.
Okay. But I'm trying to see, the thing I'm trying to say, the story is very simple. It's what? You had the noon. In the noon, there was apparent chaos. But what existed within the noon? Something existed within the noon.
It was order, but it was unperceived.
Right. It was unperceived order. So you had boundlessness, obscurity, darkness, limitlessness. And then out of the noon, what happened out of the noon?
Batar came out the noon.
Ptah came out the noon. How did Ptah come out the noon?
Called himself out of the noon.
Don't say that. Noon was represented in what image? Water. Right. And then what came out of the noon?
Fire. Was it fire?
A hill.
A hill.
Relates to
Ptah came out as a hill out of the noon.
Great mountain of fire.
And then what happened?
Great mountain of fire. Was it fire?
But what happened in the story? There were characters. See, the characters in the story represent cosmic principles. But if you can just remember the basic characters in the story, then you can understand the relationship between the cosmic principles. So first you have to understand the basic story, and it's three simple parts, right? The noon, apparent chaos. Within the noon you had how many gods?
8.
Yeah, 8.
Rob?
You had 8.
Oh,
You had 4 pairs, right? A male and a female, which were related or symbolized as what? As what?
The elements.
Yeah, within the story, they were what? Frogs and snakes, right? In the waters of the noon. Then out of the waters arisen Ptah in the form of a hill, and then what occurred? What? A tomb appeared. Where?
On top of the hill.
On top of Ptah. And then what happened?
Rob.
Atum, what happened?
Started creating, right?
Started creating. How did he start creating?
He spoke it.
What did he speak?
Creative utterance.
It was creative utterance, but what did he speak? Atum commenced to do something. What did he do?
Name the parts of himself.
He named the parts of himself, which then represented as what?
The 4 pairs of God.
The 4 pairs of gods. Right. So then now, we got into that talking about magic. Because he says magic is the key to interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy. And then if magic is the qualities of entities, human and divine, distributed throughout their parts, in contact with such entities, releases those qualities. So he was speaking that, or bringing that principle up to define how Atum was able to create. They said, where did Atum get his power to create? Well, Ptah came out of the noon. But when he appeared out of the noon as a hill, simultaneously, at the same time, Atum set on Ptah and began creation by naming the parts of itself, which were the 4 pairs of gods. And there were 4 pairs of gods in the noon, but they were unperceivable. You could not perceive them, but they existed. And so Ptah was the heart and tongue of the noon, which represents what? Heart and tongue. This is critical because by talking about the virtues, we're talking about the same concept of magic. It can help you understand how and why these various principles and concepts can work.
The heart is the soul.
The heart,
Heart and tongue would be divine will.
the tongue would be divine will,
Yeah, heart and tongue.
and the heart is what?
Heart is perception.
Perception. And so the issue is one, being able to perceive, and then what you perceive, implement that through divine will. And Atum represents consciousness, because it named itself, it became conscious of its own parts of its own self, which represents really conscious of the various elements of creation. So, we got that talking about virtue, in terms of how virtue is the discipline and virilities of the soul. And so what is the soul? How would you define the soul? Whatever comes to your mind. Be free to say whatever comes to your mind. What do you think it is? Give your best guess, your best thought.
The soul is the one that knows.
Yes. What else? We talked a lot about this. I know that you got ideas in your mind. What do you think? Thought. Since soul is thought. Okay. So what else?
Is the real.
Soul is the real. So the soul is that divine aspect. It's a divine aspect in you. Each of us carries, or actually an individualized aspect of creation. And that animating aspect that provides the life force for us to be conscious, to be alive, is that spark of the divine, of the creation, which is the soul is the individualized part in us. So in a sense, they say like it's a reflection. It's like if you had a mirror, say if there was one mirror that made up creation, that mirror was broken into many parts. There was one flame. You would see the image of the one flame reflected in each of the parts. Although there would be 6 individual mirrors, and each mirror would have a flame in it, the flame that it would be reflecting is truly the same flame. But because it's fragments, we're fragmented or aspects of the one, it still would be reflected individually, because each of those fragments would have its own shape. It's just this is just an imagery to help you understand the concept that each of us are actually an aspect or reflection of the one that is individualized. In reality, we're all connected. In reality, we're all connected. But in the the material aspect of it, we appear separate. The separation is only an appearance. It is not real. But the soul is that individualized aspect of the one in each thing. Each thing is animated by creative life force. And so the soul is that individual part. So, and what is trying to happen? Why is this going on? You know, this is part of a drama. Why is it happening?
We're on a journey.
We're on a journey. What type of a journey?
The universe is becoming conscious of itself.
The universe becoming conscious of itself. Right. And so its potentiality, the potential is moving to become real. So in actuality, all of us are potential ideas becoming real. It's the same context that within the noon, creation already existed, but it was not perceivable. And so then through our tomb or consciousness, the potential is now being made real or being made perceivable. So we are we're the actualization of the potential. We're that potential actualizing itself, becoming real. So that's the journey we're on. And so if the soul is that aspect of the divine that knows, that's connected to the universal, then by strengthening, doing those things that feed and strengthen the soul, strengthens us in terms of realizing our potential. Because the soul does know. It is that part that knows. And so then the virtues then align you or put you in sync with, or in sympathetic resonance with, or in a state of fidelity with the divine through the soul. So anyway, so the key thing is magic. The magic is the key, because magic is the foundation through which meditation, it gives you the foundation of why meditation is so important. Because then if, through meditation, if you go inward and make contact with your own divine self, by making contact with your own divine self, the qualities and entities, human and divine, are contained within their parts. And by contacting such entities, those qualities are released. So that if your divine self or your inner self is your soul is that divine self, then by practicing forms of meditation or inner connection, what they call having knowledge and conversation with one's holy guardian angel, or your God self, your divine self, the Guru self, the Krishna self, the Buddha self, by going in and making contact with that level of consciousness, then the qualities of that level of consciousness become perceivable to your conscious mind. Which then allows you through the perception, then you have to then deal with creative utterance. That means then do you move on what you perceive and make it become reality. And that's how creation occurs. By going inward, you then identify those parts of yourself, and then you move on that. The creative utterance is the movement. You then create from that. And so in actuality, by you, that's why the exercise of you going into meditation, and then, because you hear stuff comes to you. Everybody has inner sight in various forms. When we mention certain words, something comes to your mind. But what happens is, normally you become so conditioned by your outer self that you filter or censor what's coming through, even before it has a chance, many times, to reach your conscious perception. You may just get a intuitive glimpse of what's coming, and because it may be somewhat, I want to say deviant to which you've been conditioned, you already, you hold it, you keep it in prison. You don't let it come out. So if you don't let it come out and you don't identify it, you don't name it. Name it is identifying it. Then it can't become alive. It can't become real. So then, if your soul knows then by you going in contact with your soul, you can then also know. And the soul is connected to the past, present, and the future. That means that you can understand or know the past, present, and the future by going in and contacting your own form of divine self. And through practicing the virtues are the virilities. They strengthen the soul, which make it become stronger in your life. So by practicing the virtues, you then invigorate that divine aspect of yourself, which then makes it easier for you to be in contact with it. So if you're in a more direct contact with it, that means you are more knowledgeable, truly knowledgeable. And that was the point. That's the stolen legacy, is the stealing of that legacy of divine consciousness. And then the perversion or misinterpretation of that legacy to now it becomes a misinterpreted, perverted understanding. That's what stolen legacy is really talking about. So then the point is only by coming and regaining that legacy will we then also be able to reascend and build those great civilizations that were our true legacy. So we could go on and on. So but the key is really you need to meditate on that definition. Memorize the definition, and then in your mind go over each of those words and really understand what it's talking about. So it's not just an intellectual construct that you can just say it, but you have to feel what it's talking about. You have to be able to, it should be able to trigger various other images in your mind in terms of how it operates. Once you start internalizing that, you can then work magic. Because your divine self has paranormal or parapsychological or metaphysical qualities or properties, which means you can touch things and gain knowledge. You can reflect on things and gain knowledge. You can hold ideas in your mind and gain knowledge. You can tune in to situations and gain knowledge when you start operating from that principle. So you'll start to eliminate the barriers that really separate you from truly reflecting or becoming conscious of what you're contacting. So, critical. So that's a critical piece. Understand the basic scenario of the Memphite theology. Just those basic points. If you can hold those basic points in your mind and you start to encounter various other philosophical and religious systems, it'll put it in context for you. And you can understand. But again, you have to deal with the struggle. Remember I said it's a struggle to work with the knowledge that creates the heat for the alchemical transformation. The struggle, it creates the heat for the transformation. Without the struggle, there is no true transformation because you don't have the level of heat necessary to transform the elements. And so then embrace the struggle. By embracing the struggle, then you consciously step forward and move to self-transformation. Self-transformation.
Without the struggle, there is no progress.
Right. That's just the same principle operates on all the various planes or levels. So as we engage, and I always like to bring it back to how we're operating today, then as we're trying to build new businesses or new associations or new relationships, the struggle is a part of it. And many times when the struggle starts happening, things break down because people don't want to engage in the struggle. They think everything is supposed to be like Hollywood, just, a freeway with no traffic jams and everything is just smooth sailing. But if that was true, then you wouldn't even need to be here. So let's go through at least some review of those 10 virtues. which we're talking about steadfastness, fidelity and devotion, fortitude, temperance and courage, obedience, prudence and wisdom, and justice. So you need to work out some kind of a method that you can memorize. So whatever technique you need to work that out, because then that will help you, again, hold it in memory. So steadfastness, what's steadfastness? What comes to mind when we say steadfastness?
On your path.
On your path. What comes to mind? Something comes to mind. Free yourself. It's okay. You can say whatever you want. It's all right. The point is to engage. That's the point. You know, like the difference between standing on the sidelines and actually participating. You know, a lot of people say, well, I want to drum, I want to dance, or I want to do whatever. But they say it by standing on the sidelines and not participating. It don't ever happen until you start participating. And starting to participate is only the beginning. So the longer you sit on the sidelines talking about you want to participate, the longer before you will actually achieve a level of proficiency. Because starting it is just the beginning. That's not when you achieve the proficiency. So the longer we hold back and delay even engaging, the longer we can keep ourselves from actually achieving. It may seem very, very simple, but it's very, very critical. Because the essential thing we're trying to do is to become unconditioned. Become unconditioned. Can you really be who you are as an individual entity as opposed to being a conditioned entity? You know, now people are operating from a conditioned entity as opposed to being unconditioned, being free, being liberated. Because things are happening in your mind. Images are coming to your mind. Because every word that I'm saying is an energy form that then has a reaction. And the type of reaction that is happening in you is the key to your role. It's a key to your calling. Because each of you are a particular energy, right? Each of you are a particular energy form, a particular frequency. And so the way that the same word hits you is going to be reflected differently. And the way it's reflected then gives you insight into your particular work. Because each of your minds are going to be attracted to maybe look at it a little bit different. And it's only how the whole expressing all those differences does the whole become a reality. I'm saying all I have to say is, when I talk about steadfastness, what comes to your mind? Just the ability, what comes to your mind?
Staying focused.
Staying focused. Everybody should have a word, 2 words, a vision, an image, a color. Something should come to your mind. You say steadfast.
Will.
Will. Discipline.
Undeterred.
Unperturbed.
Readiness for initiation.
Readiness for initiation. Commitment. Anything else? That's just one word. Steadfastness, standing fast. Readiness and preparation for initiation. What's initiation? What comes to your mind? Again, the exercise. Something comes to your mind.
Courage to make a step forward.
Courage to make a step forward.
Rising to a higher level.
Rising to a higher level.
Beginning a process of discipline to rise to a higher level.
Beginning your process of discipline to rise to a higher level. Come on, everybody. Put in your 2 cents. Everybody put in their 2 cents and we have $1. See, again, I'm keeping stressing this because this is essentially a part of our problem. Because when we come together, there's hesitancy in people really following on what they're being prompted to follow on. Because people see stuff. Because we're so conditioned, we don't do it. And because we don't do it, the thing is not as successful as it should be. So then we become our own prisoners. We're perpetuating our own imprisonment. That's why it's not, the information is only a conduit for a process. It's the process that is the most important point. Because of time, we want to get through all this, but the time is an illusion. Right. Say initiation. Well, one definition is a spiritual and psychological rebirth or regeneration. Initiation exactly is entering into. This really means entering into. And actually, it's a process that one enters into, that one becomes transformed or recreated. And it's based around some curriculum. Whatever the curriculum is what you're recreated in the image of. So it can be positive, negative, mundane, everyday, or it can be, on all levels.
Could it be a resurrection?
It is a resurrection. If you're recreated, right. Because to enter into something, you have to come out of it. So it's going through the death, rebirth process. And the similar is usually tied to going back into a process of going into a womb, going through a transformative process, and then coming out of that womb into some new condition or some new state. It's kind of the essence of it. So we're talking about, basically I had some handouts on 8 different identified sections. Usually one, you have to have some knower, some body of knowledge. That can be in a book, it can be in a teacher, it can be in school or whatever, experience of life. The knowing or knowers. The knowers, and you have a separation. You have a sacred space. Again, that can be what? That can be just, the ultimate sacred space is a state of consciousness. The ultimate sacred space is that you go into a divine state of consciousness and dwell or exist there. From that perspective. Which means you separate yourself from the more everyday conditioned state of consciousness. Based upon a body of knowledge. The highest body of knowledge would then be your inner self, your higher self, Christ or God or Haru in you. That's your teacher, that's your follower. So you follow this teacher into higher states of consciousness. So then you go into this journey of transformation. Then once you go in, you separate yourself or turn yourself away from the outer and go into the inner. You turn your back on the world. And say only by turning your back on the world can you gain the world. Because only by separating yourself from a thing can you gain control of the thing. Because once you're connected to the thing, you and it are identified and it controls you. Which is also one of the techniques for being able to control your passion or your emotions. It's by disidentifying with them. I'm mixing in all these various elements of the virtue. Initiation, actually going through and living the virtues, is a process of initiation. And so then once you separate yourself and you go through a symbolical death, which means basically you re-identify yourself. You cease to identify yourself with the state that you were in, and you go through, start trying to identify yourself with the new thing you're trying to achieve. So the old self dies, and now you go back into a fetal state of being recreated toward this new image, whatever that image is. And then the process of then achieving or trying to attain that image is trials and tribulations, tests. Be it just, what do you remember? This is a test. What do you remember? It's a trial and tribulation. There were trials and tribulations trying to come here consistently every Thursday. Through rainstorms, through traffic, through other things in your life. And so it tested you in terms of how steadfast were you going to be. So again, it comes down to that level. And then once you deal with the trials and tribulations, through the trials and tribulations, if you reflect on the trials and tribulations, you will gain knowledge or insight. Because every trial, every thing you meet in life has an inner and an outer lesson. And only by reflecting on it will you really gain the inner lesson. Because you have to look inside of it, you just can't take it at face value. That means every person you meet, you talk to, every situation in your life has a message or a lesson for you relative to what your purpose is, if you pay attention to it. So then once one gains that understanding of looking at that in that light, in that perspective, then one becomes resurrected, you become re-identified with a whole new orientation. It means you get a new identity. You no longer see yourself in the old way, you see yourself in a new way. That's the resurrection. And then from the resurrection, then comes a reincorporation, because once you gain that new identity, then you operate from that new identity, and then you'll become reincorporated in your community based upon this new identity. Now that can be formalized in a formal process, but it's actually how life is operating. You're doing this every day. You're being recreated every day. And really, literally, every moment of every day, you're going through that process. But it's based upon your consciousness. Determines what degree and what level of change actually occurs in your life. So we talked about preparation for initiation. So they're saying in Stolen Legacy and the Kemetic arts, and really the African arts, one's life is in preparation for initiation and transformation. That's what it's all about. Spiritual and psychological regeneration. Moving from, we go to the next piece, which also we talked about knowing polarities relate to the real and the unreal.
Idea.
Idea as opposed to what?
The thought in the physical is a replication of
Okay. But we're talking about understanding the real and the unreal. So we mentioned a number of dialectical opposites or perspectives. We're saying that the real is the spiritual. What other synonyms could you list that's on that side? And then the unreal, what type of synonym can be related for that side? Saying spiritual, physical. So what are the correlations that you think about that can go into that dichotomy?
Seen and unseen.
Seen and unseen. What else comes to your mind?
Spiritual and physical, but I always think of mental, but how does mental come into there?
How would mental come in?
I always hear that.
Well, that's a different perspective, because mental is related to what? I mean, you know, mental is actually a mechanism. So your mental body is actually a tool, because you can mentally be focusing on physical things, you can mentally be focusing on spiritual things. So mental in itself is not physical or spiritual. It is a mechanism of recognition, really. So if you have spiritual, what other kind of synonyms would be over there, you know? You got spiritual, you got metaphysical, you got invisible, you got the unseen, you have what? The higher, you have
Higher self, lower self.
higher self, lower self. So the key they're saying is understanding that the real is the visible, the higher, the divine, the spiritual, the invisible, the metaphysical side. And that the opposite, which is the unreal, is the physical, the material, the mundane. Not that it doesn't exist, but it is not the cause or the source. It's only a reflection. So then you have the solar and the lunar, the greater and the lesser. Again, understanding these categories will also help you to understand, to make a distinction between the real and the unreal. So they're talking about the higher mysteries and the lesser mysteries. When they talked about that a function of initiation and deep meditation one also develops extrasensory perception. One is able to start tuning in terms of psychometry, clairvoyance, clairaudience. But if that is an effect, that's really not the real. Again, being able to distinguish between the real and the unreal helps you stay steadfast, because so many people get caught up in the glamour, which then takes them off the path, because they start to identify what is really an illusion, and it's not real from the standpoint of the ultimate reality, ultimate real. And again, just keeping these things in one mind, because as you travel each day, you're being confronted with the real and the unreal. And so what are you steadfast in? Are you steadfast in focusing on the unreal, the invisible, the spiritual, the intuitive, the divine, or is it the physical, the job, the bill, the car, the physical thing?
What you can touch, what you can feel. I mean, things that are so visible. I mean, I guess it can be concrete, but concrete can be spiritual too, right? What you can feel is spiritual, but I was thinking of actually what you can touch, things you can see.
As being what?
What's viable is what you can put in your, what you can grasp, what's in your hand. That's physical.
As being what? Real or unreal?
I can see it as being both. Sometimes in your mind, the spirituality aspect of it, what's concrete in your mind could be spiritual too.
The key, we have a flip chart.
You can write on that.
No, I mean, we have some.
Oh yes, we got it.
We have some symbols already.
It's right behind the.
But see, all of this, again, the context of the whole discussion is based upon really the next factor, fidelity. And fidelity is creating a spiritual life, sonum bonum. And so I'm saying that you're saying that the physical can be real and unreal. But the context, the whole point is the context. Because if we say magic is the key to interpretation of ancient philosophy and religion, and the essential point is dealing with the soul, and the soul is the divine in you, and what knows, it is that invisible part that is the real part. The physical is only real in the context of the role that it plays in the larger drama. It in itself is meaningless out of context of the role that it plays in the greater order of things. And so the context or the reference point of the greater order of things is the foundation for ma'at, for justice, for balance, for harmony. Because for balance to happen, you have to have the two opposing balanced. And so then it goes right back to steadfastness relative to understanding the real and the unreal, creating a balance between the visible and the invisible. Or between your outer self and your inner self, which then also goes into fidelity. Because fidelity also deals with what? What's the other piece on fidelity? That we talked about, I think, last couple of weeks we brought that to mind in terms of the other part of fidelity relates to what?
You just said it.
But fidelity relative to stereos.
Exact replication.
Right. Exact replication of a sound, or which is a frequency or vibration. Well, the ultimate sound was the logos or the word, which initiated creation. So everything goes back to that one sound. Everything else is just a variation off of that one sound. So then if one is truly dealing with fidelity in terms of exact replication of that sound, then how steadfast are you in replicating or reflecting through your physical form the divine sound, the logos, the word? That's why I got back to context.
What's the definition of soul journey? Grounding
The
habit.
greatest good,
Oh, the greatest good.
which was to become godlike while in the physical form, which means in actuality for you to be able to reflect fidelity, reflect your divine nature while you're in the physical form. If you're really talking about a spiritualizing matter, that your physical reality is a reflection of the spiritual reality, which then if you go back into the Kemetic order on how their physical civilization was a reflection of the divine order of the heavens, they acted out that principle of fidelity, the exact replication of the divine through the physical. And when the best stereos now is we get into digital CDs, because the sound is so getting more and more exact, as if you were in direct living contact with the source of the sound. And what is actually happening with technology is actually reflecting the spiritual journey. Because of our reference point, we can't see the spiritual lesson in the physical, mechanical things that are being created every day. Because the physical is a reflection of the spiritual. But if our perception is based upon the wrong reference point, we will misinterpret what is right there in front of our face. That's why reference point is so powerful. So fidelity, sonum bonum, creating spiritual life, or becoming godlike. And how does one become godlike?
By the virtue.
By the virtues and
Several arts and sciences.
similar arts and sciences.
And the supreme good.
Well, supreme good is the sonum bonum. So that's fidelity. So the issue is creating spiritual life. Are you moving and reflecting in your actions the creation of a spiritual life? Or what other word, energy are you reflecting? So next we go into devotion. Dedication to a purpose or goal, giving meaning to one's life. So the highest goal would be the creation of a spiritual life or achieving the sonum bonum. That would be the highest purpose or goal, because that's the highest manifestation that one can achieve. So then what are you devoted to? Is a question that you have to answer yourself. But you're answering that question each moment relative to what are you fulfilling. Remember we talked about fulfilling the moment. So each moment you're confronted with a potential. You have the highest level of spiritual potential. So each moment, what are you fulfilling each moment? That makes up the total quality of your life. That then determines your karma. It determines your future. Because karma is basically what? Really the essence of karma is what?
Action.
Right. It's action. Your actions determine everything. So then what is the quality of your action? You got a question?
Yeah, you talking about spiritualizing matter. Talk about that.
What do you think I'm talking about? Within the context of fidelity.
Spiritualizing matter. Make it matter spiritual.
Don't say you don't know, because then when you say you don't know, you shut down what you do know. Because by you saying you don't know, something came to your mind that you wanted to say, within your conscious mind, it was doubtful. You don't want to put it out there. But what made you say that is really the key to the correct answer, if you really think about it. So what did you want to say? I mean, it's a laboratory. Give a shot at it. It's okay. Don't come out.
I can't think of nothing.
But what?
Make matter spiritual.
To make matter spiritual. So how can matter be made spiritual? The answer is within the question. For an example, if you give an example of how you can make matter spiritual. What is spiritual? If you understand spiritual, then you know how matter can be made spiritual. What's spiritual?
Spiritual is the divine.
The key to it all is we're saying that we are on a journey. That's it right here. You want to pan over here to see this is get this image in your mind. If you can maintain this fundamental image in your mind, it can really create the context from which you can answer a lot of the questions. Because we have related here that this blackness represents the noon, apparent chaos or disorder, which is an illusion because within the noon there was order, which just was unperceptible. And then the mound of Ptah, which is the heart and tongue, the perception and the creative utterance. But again, Ptah did not manifest itself. It had to have a tune that actually did the actual creating. But Ptah is in all things. It is the heart and tongue of the noon, which is ultimate. It is the ultimate possibility. The noon is all and nothing. It means if you have nothing, you also have everything, because anything is possible. So if anything is possible, that means all things are possible, which then means for the possibility to fulfill itself, all things eventually must occur. That's why there's positive and negative in life, good and bad, because all those are possibilities. But there is an ultimate reality, which is ma'at, truth, balance, harmony, righteousness, reciprocity, etc., which is the foundation for existence or being. Because even within the noon, there were 8, which is a balance. There were pairs. That's a principle that's operating. It's telling you that everything is a male and female. Male and female is not woman or man. It is both what is called creating or initiating and also preserving or balancing. Those two things. But anyway, so Ptah, and then you have Atum simultaneously. In reality, we talked about how you had, even the story gives you the darkness. Within the darkness, you had the 8. Then you had the noon that projected itself out of the darkness, but yet it was still non-manifestation. It was non-manifested. But then simultaneously, this side you have the Ptah, then you got Atum, which is like the sun, the fire, the energy. And then from that, it manifested the 8. If you just look at the scenario, you have the same pattern reflected. Right, so you have the potentiality reflecting itself into actuality. So the issue in terms of how to spiritualize matter is what is the potentiality that's trying to realize itself. What are the spiritual principles? What are the spiritual principles? So then what is the sonum bonum? The sonum bonum is become godlike, while one's in a physical form. That means the physical form obeys the divine principles. So then, for a human, now all things out of the context of humans, out of the human world, obey divine law. Humans are the only ones, because they have will, that can disobey. Well, in one sense, they're not disobeying. They can act out of harmony with divine law in terms of the ultimate positive potential. They can act out of harmony with it, but the disharmony will eventually bring them back into harmony. But the point I'm saying is, animals and plant and kingdom, the mineral kingdom, they obey divine law. So then humans represent another level of consciousness, another evolutionary stage. And so then those things within our domain, which are the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and the mineral kingdom, how we order those things creates the spiritualization of the thing, of what we create. You follow what I'm saying? How we order those things, right. Now the key word here is what? Order. How we order those things around us, mineral, vegetable, animal, and human relations. How we order those things in our lives determines the spiritualization of them. So now, what purpose are we ordering things around? So then we build an automobile, right? We've got the automobile society. What is the purpose of that car? Is it to create the sonum bonum? Is that the blueprint or the ideal that determines the order? So then when you get up in the morning, the food that you eat, the things you put on, the things you say, what is ordering that? What creates that order? So what's your reference point that determines how you order your day? Is that spiritual or is it material? Material in terms of the mundane, the exoteric.
So that's how you spiritualize that.
Right.
By the way you live.
Right.
Okay.
And so then if you look at a civilization and how they live, how they order themselves, what is the guiding principles that is ordering their life? Is it spiritual principles, or is what kind of principles are it? Is it? And which went back to the question that we raised last week, is virtue is to the soul as justice is to the state. What is the principles upon which these things are ordered? Are they divine principles, or are they derivations and interpretations for other ulterior motives that are material? So each moment of every day you're being weighed against these spiritual truths. In terms of perception, what are you perceiving?
All the time.
Hmm?
That's what you're saying.
Right. Because you're perceiving something all the time. But from what perspective are you perceiving? And from your perception, you create. And your creation represents the divine utterance. It's the movement. You create a step. You button your shirt up. That's the utterance. That's the movement. That's the activity. You combed your hair. You got in your car. You drove in a certain direction. You said certain words to people. It's based upon what perception? And that's your heart. But the context is this. We're saying the ultimate goal of sonum bonum is to become godlike. That means God understands past, present, and future. What was, is, and shall be. So then, are we operating in the context of the whole cycle, the whole journey? If we're saying the ultimate destination is to become godlike, called Christos, or Krishna, or Buddha, or Osiris, or Haru, a pharaoh, a king, a conqueror, all those words represent the ultimate goal, illumination, right? To become one with the divine. That's the context. So as we function each day, is it in reference to that, or is it in reference to what? And the purpose, when you have cosmic consciousness, that means that your consciousness is constantly orientated to this cosmic reality. That's why I say the great, if you really meet or interact with people who are truly spiritual masters, they are always in that state of unity with divine consciousness. It and them become one. That's why I say the ultimate reality is that you have to sacrifice yourself. The ultimate is that you and it become merged into one. And that's why they did John Coltrane's album, Selflessness. Yourself no longer become you. You become totally an instrument in the realization of the divine order. Exactly, since you become a slave to the true master, which is divine reality. But again, people take those words and manipulate those words and make them seem more, mundane or lower than what they really are. So, the point when we talk about spiritualizing matter is how are you ordering everything that you come in contact with? Relative to what? That's the question I always had. Relative to what? So are you operating every day steadfast and that you are focused on the invisible as opposed to the visible, to the real as opposed to the unreal? And then in that perception of that, that's a discrimination, right? In that perception of that, are you then reflecting what you perceive? Because you can know about the principle, but yet don't reflect that. That's the fidelity. And then the devotion to it. And devotion means that you add fire to it. You just don't do it passively. You start to do it with vigor, with enthusiasm. So then you accelerate it, because then you can add it. It's like you get in the flow, and by going with the flow, like surfing, you can accelerate the travel because you're going with the energy. You follow what I'm saying? As opposed to going against it, and you retard the strength of the power. So I'm going to keep, because we got to get through all of these. So then fortitude, freedom from resentment under the experience of persecution and wrong. So here we're talking about, as you then start to become unconditioned and follow the inner voice, the inner teacher, the inner wisdom, you're going to meet with resistance. You're going to meet with resistance from your own mind, because it's just going to take you through changes, because it's going to be uncomfortable, or it's going to be doubtful, or you might have fears or anxieties, all these conditioned things. You got to overcome that. So then you got to have fortitude to withstand that. You're going to be tested. Then your friends and associates may also test you, because for you to break and become free challenges them to become free. And if they don't want to become free, they have to keep you in prison. Because once someone breaks free, then it's possible for everybody to become free. So if we can keep everybody in prison, then it seems like there's no hope to get free, and everybody will just kind of resign themselves to be prisoners. There's no possibility of escape, so we just got to deal with what we are, what we have. That's why they try to keep that sense of powerlessness with people. So people just resign themselves to make do, just to cope, and not truly strive to be what they really can be, to reach their true potential. And so then you're going to be tested, freedom from resentment. But then the resentment The opposition is really a reflection of your actions. And so if you're getting all this opposition, it really is a verification that you're on the right path. So back in the city, we said anything that the oppressor supports, we oppose. Anything they oppose, we support. It's dialectics. But you know, they're not going to support anything that's going to undermine themselves. So if they're out here supporting something, you know that underneath what they're supporting is for your perpetuation of your enslavement and your oppression. But to move forward, then temperance, control of one's actions of the passional nature. Let's get into the sevenfold constitution of man. So if you keep these basic symbolisms in mind, you also can, it can give you, they reproduce themselves over and over again. So the sevenfold constitution, which got me on that, as I said, we're talking about temperance, controlling the passional nature, controlling one's actions and their passional nature. And so then, passional nature is not just the emotional nature, but really talking about the passions of the lower self. When we talk about the lower self and the higher self in the sevenfold constitution, you have the physical, the etheric, which is the unity between the physical body, you have an energetic body, they go hand in hand. If you didn't have an energetic body, your physical body wouldn't have any vitality, wouldn't exist. So what animates your physical body is the energy. You know, the molecules and atoms, and then everything that's connected to it is based upon electromagnetism and bioelectrochemical reactions. So it's energy, it's energetic. So then the emotional, and so it also means anything physical has an etheric or energetic shadow or component to it. And the energetic component is then based upon the life force that energizes all things. So that's why how through physical things you can contact all things because of magic. Right? Because it's been energized by the life force, and the life force is in all things, then one can contact all things through contacting other physical things. But you have to know how to then merge with or make contact with that particular level of the thing, which is a perception. By understanding the nature of the thing through your mind, you then can attune yourself to that aspect of the thing and then open up dimensions through your perception. Because your perception is a level of consciousness, which is a level of energy, which is a frequency, which then will put you in tune with that particular level or dimension, which then means that you can access that just like a receiving station. But you also then, once you develop the capacity, can transmit, because it's always two-way. Because if something is coming in and is connecting with you, it's also reconnecting with its source. Which then is back to the whole issue of magic. Because if everything is connected to the divine, then you can then contact the divine by connecting with it. Because it's all connected. So it has really what's going on now in terms of the material world, in terms of doing with these worldwide webs and global networks. All the Euros are doing is bringing into physical manifestation what is already an invisible reality. There's already a worldwide web. There's already an internet that exists between all living entities. Because we have refocused our attention into the physical, we then manifested it in the physical, in terms of through physical mechanical means. If we refocus our energy to the spiritual, then we would also realize that interconnectivity on the spiritual level, or the metaphysical level, or the psychic level, because it is a reality. It is real. The only thing that's keeping us from accessing it is the resistance of our conscious mind to the reality of it. And so when you have doubts or lack of knowledge or fears, it's just like putting a resistor in a circuit. It draws all the energy that would naturally flow in the circuit. And then if it's strong enough, you won't have enough power to energize what you need to have in that circuit. That's why those things are actually called psychic debris that are part of those conditioned negativities and taboos and fears that are implanted in our conscious mind that then becomes a part of our subconscious mind or our memory bank through just living in society. So all those various images and fables and stories and the words that are said, they have negative connotations or limiting definitions. You internalize those and hold those in your subconscious mind. And it's only through your subconscious mind that you can go into your intuitive mind. So that if your subconscious mind is filled with all kind of negative, doubtful, inferior ideas and imagery, it creates a resistor that then creates a blockage that then draws or absorbs all the energy that then creates a barrier from you making greater contact with your own divine self and with greater spiritual reality. That's why for you to become truly spiritual, you have to go in and purge and regenerate all that negative residue that's down in your own unconscious mind. And that's the hell in you. And it's only by going down into that dimension of your own self, confronting that negativity, and then shedding light on that negativity, can you regenerate that and then take the free energy, because you then free it up. Then you have to have something to rechannel it into so it then doesn't become wild and stimulate all kinds of uncontrollable kinds of desires or impulses in you. And so we got that in terms of temperance. Both when you temper steel, it's becoming tempered, which is part of tempers. Also temperature, be able to control the temperature or the heat or the fire or the desire. And then by channeling it and also insulating it. And the way you insulate it is through living a life of virtue, because the virtue then becomes something that invigorates or strengthens you and empowers you to then be able to withstand higher and higher degrees of energy, which is really higher and higher levels of consciousness, because it is energy. So again, I'm just trying to show you how all these things are really interrelated. So alchemical process and all these processes are really a reflection of a psychic thing that's actually going on. But then the passions or the lower nature, when we talk the lower nature, the physical, etheric, emotional, and lower mental, which is the lower four or the lower three, which is the lower self or the beast. Again, I'm just reviewing all of this to try to put it in context with the virtues. And then the higher self is the higher mental, which deals with the philosophical ideas, abstract thinking, dialectical thinking, intuitional, which is the lucid mind, and then divine mind or divine will, which is really pure maya. But without you having the ability to perceive and understand what's going on, what usually happens is the lower self has become so conditioned through emotional experiences, misinformation, the wrong facts or ideas that condition your lower mental mind. And your physical body is so disrupted with all kind of noise, be it gas or cramps or, stiffness, because, by your physical body becoming flexible and fluid, it actually is able to experience the unobstructed flow of universal truth. If you follow what I'm saying. That's why through Hatha Yoga, through becoming physically totally flexible and in tune, you can also then be in direct perception of Maya or divine law, because then it will be operating within you physically and you can perceive it and know. Or by you through the breathing, by you getting and controlling the breath and the thinking, you then can also become unified with the divine part of yourself, and through the issue of fidelity, reflect it, become conscious of it, perceive it, and also know. Through working, which is karma yoga, working selflessly for others, for a higher cause, through your dedication of uniting and trying to work for the higher cause, you also can come into a unity with the divine truth, and also then know. Or through your perfect devotion, this is Bhakti Yoga, through your perfect devotion that you're totally devoted to the principle of love and humanity, and you operate from that every day. After a while, you recondition your thinking, which helps to then transform those opposite thoughts in your subconscious mind, to eventually you will create a balance where you recondition all that negative thinking, but then you will become in balance, and then again you will become unified with that divine love and know. So these different forms of yoga are different pathways to union with God concept and knowing, which are actually forms of mastering the lower self. Because the behavior that, and you're ordering these things around the higher principles. That means the way I carry my physical body is based upon the ordering it, or put it in the order of proper posture, proper breathing. How I act toward people is based upon higher law. And so over time, you recondition yourself based upon this higher order, and then you merge with that and become one with that. So that talks about, and so I'm just, again, all these things we've talked about, I'm just trying to bring them in the context of this journey of fortitude. And then we also talked about freedom from resentment under persecution in terms of understanding the context, all things that are happening within the context of karma. Which then are also a particular lesson that is being brought to the whole. What is the lesson that's being brought as opposed to the action itself? And then we also, when we talked about freedom from resentment, we talked about the whole issue of karma and how the ancient masters use the natural impulse, right, to give in kind. So somebody do something negative to you, there may be a natural instinct to do negative back. But that's an energy response. So then they capitalize on that energy response by not responding in the negative, but by responding from a position of higher love, which then actually accelerated the energy that was negative. So somebody come up and slap you upside your head, your natural response might be to slap them back. And so he said what they did is capitalize on that is by not slapping them back, which just would have been another negative kind of response. The reaction may have been for you to articulate an understanding to them that causes for them to think at a higher level of consciousness, which does two things. One is it accelerates your growth, because you then take that negative response and transform the regenerate into a positive, which then accelerates your growth. At the same time, you accelerate the growth of the whole because you challenge the initiator of a negative act to reflect from a higher perspective. And even though they may not change immediately, it does set up an act in their life experience that lays the seed for a transformation in the future. If you follow what I'm talking about. Which in one sense is even relating to what King was trying to do in the whole nonviolent movement. And see, we gauge things from small time frames. So in a small time frame, there may not have been an immediate change in the attitudes and behaviors of those that were doing the oppression. But if you look and take things out in a longer time frame, say if you elevate your consciousness to a higher time frame, it does lay the seeds for the eventual transformation. Because if you look at a lot of the patterns and also some of the examples that a lot of folks are trying to get into now because of all this accelerated violence, they started talking about resolution, conflict resolution, nonviolent resolution, whatever. But the techniques that are trying to be employed were seeded years before that, and he was only an extension of that same philosophy that went back in time. To where if those initial people that initiated that, who may have end up being martyrs, hadn't did that, it would not have germinated to the eventual flowering way down the line. And so I'm just raising that question because many times we may judge or get caught up in the judgment of the benefit of our behavior in the immediate. And because we don't see immediate physical change, we think no change has occurred. But all change occurs inwardly before it manifests outwardly. So then once we start to elevate our consciousness and understand that, we can operate in the context of the invisible and may not visibly have to get recognition or resources. Because there are a lot of highly evolved individuals that are doing very dedicated work and nobody knows nothing about it. Because they're not operating from the physical. Which is the ultimate, where I don't have to get recognition for what I'm doing. Because you're not doing it to get recognition. You're already recognized already. And that's the context in which you're doing it. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
Which also becomes, you can tell, and although we're humans and it helps, it does help because we're still humans. We're not living in a community of masters, so it still helps us to give strokes and to support each other. I'm talking about, the ultimate ideal, but then, we have to work our way up there. So let me keep moving as we get through this. We talk about fortitude. We talk about temperance, the passional nature. The passional nature, we talked about techniques to control the passions. Number one was observation. You had to start to observe how you act. But the fact of observing yourself, start to separate yourself from the doer and the observer. If you follow what I'm saying. I'm saying you are not just your conscious self. Your conscious self is only one aspect of you. You also have an unconscious component. You have a higher self component. And so then many times when you're doing something, if you learn to then separate and observe yourself while you're doing it, you gain greater knowledge and control of yourself. So then disidentification becomes the issue. In terms of one of the techniques is to go about your day and not to identify with your emotions. So if you start feeling something, don't identify with it. And then observe it. So if you're feeling anxious, frustrated, angry, whatever, lustful, or you want to just, I want to just eat, or I just want to do whatever. I'm mad, I want to strike out, whatever it is. Observe it. Don't identify with it. See it as an entity of its own and not you.
You call it
disidentify.
Disidentify.
You disidentify, because whatever you identify with controls you, because you and it become one. So then if you feel anger and you say, I'm angry, then you become angry. Mm-hmm. But anger is triggered by something. What is triggering this anger? Because you are not the anger. Anger is not you, you are a soul. Anger is a feeling that is triggered by something. So what is triggering it? Or if you're frustrated,